talk about my ideal versus current cycle. Now, this is something that I try to do at least every cycle, especially at the end of the cycle where I'm kind of overall reviewing everything. But it helps put into perspective into the things that I should be working on for the next cycle. Let's start off with periods. Now, my period, ideally, I would like it to be somewhat achy because I mean, it's expected for it to be somewhat achy as the uterine lining is shedding. So yeah, somewhat achy, but cramps that are overall not too bad. As far as color goes, ideally I would like it to be kind of like a bright red, like a crimson, like for blood, like a crimson color that is regarded as like the most healthy or optimal color for menstrual blood. And ideally I would like the spotting to be maybe like a day after. So like 1 day of spotting would be ideal. Now let's talk about how my periods actually are. Now, thankfully, I don't really struggle with painful periods. It is very rare that I have pretty intense cramps, and it's usually only for the first day. But the times that I do have cramps, it is a little debilitating. I do have to take something to kind of take the edge off, which usually I do go for like something like passion flower tea, just because it does sedate me a little bit and gets me to sleep because it's for some reason it hits harder at night. I don't know why. But generally overall, the pain isn't too bad. Now, color-wise, currently it has been more on the redder side, the more crimson side, but in the past I've seen things like purple or pinks or different hues that are kind of in the middle of that, which I know isn't the most ideal thing, so I kind of always like to keep note of what color it is. And then there's also spotting. Now, currently for my last cycle, I spotted for about 3 days. So I had regular flow, so day 1 through 3. So I had light, medium, and then light. And then I had 3 additional days of spotting, which I would say is not typically the norm for me. Before in the past, I would spot maybe 2 days, but it'd be very scanty, as you could say. But now, currently, I've been dealing with a lot longer stretches of spotting, so it's something else that I like to kind of keep track of. Now, follicular phase leading up to ovulation, I would like to be slowly going towards more energy and kind of getting that peak of energy around ovulation where I can kind of tackle things, which is usually the case. I'll talk about that in a second. And I would like the follicular phase to be ideally around 12 to 16 days. Anywhere in between that would be great. And of course, the elephant in the room is actually ovulating because sometimes I don't ovulate and not every cycle is ovulatory. So now when it comes to my actual follicular phase, I've noticed more recently that I get maybe a little bit too much energy. So it will have like the very gradual increase of energy as estrogen starts to increase, which is normal. But once I get more closer to the peak of estrogen is when I get a little bit too much energy. That's where I start to feel a little bit more anxious. It's easier for me to get overstimulated. And my follicular phases are also a little bit on the long side. So I've noticed when I do ovulate, it is roughly around cycle day 22, 24, 28, where I ideally would have ovulated anywhere in like the teens numbers. So cycle day like 16, 17, 18. But usually I'm ovulating a little bit further down in the cycle if I ovulate at all, which I would much rather ovulate late than not ovulate at all because just as a friendly reminder, ovulation is more than for reproduction, it is for your overall health and it's how we produce progesterone. So we can't typically get into the luteal phase if we do not ovulate. So that has been like the biggest focus is on me actually ovulating and being able to progress onto the next phases because I, as someone that has struggled with a hormonal imbalance in the past, wasn't always ovulating. So now let's talk about the luteal phase. Now for my luteal phase, ideally I would like it to be a very low and slow gradual decline of energy. And I would like it to be pain-free. I would like no hormonal acne or any other PMS related symptom. Now, as far as my current luteal phases are going, I do have that low kind of decrease of energy. I do sometimes feel like I hit a wall. Like just one day I'll wake up and I'll be really fatigued, really tired, and I know I'm like, okay, I'm like in my luteal phase. I need to switch it up, try different work styles that will not drain me as much because my social battery, work battery will be kind of on the lower setting. But I think my biggest complaint when it comes to my luteal phase is my breast tenderness. I have a lot of breast tenderness. Last cycle, it was interesting because last cycle I noticed it around ovulation, which can happen. It is part of the estrogen surge, but it's more akin to disorganized estrogen, which I know was kind of like a red flag to keep track of. And then it kind of went down a little bit. I had it down to like level 2 breast tenderness. around ovulation, then went down a little bit, hung out around like level 1 for a couple days, went away, and then kind of came back during the late luteal phase where it went back up to a level 2 breast tenderness and kind of stayed there for a couple days. So yeah, ideally I would like there to be no breast tenderness. That would be amazing. Okay, now as far as kind of the game plans of how I plan to target those things or improve them overall for the next cycle. Currently, I've been taking acupuncture. Technically, my partner was doing acupuncture. He was in an accident and it's been helping him kind of gain mobility back and feel a little bit better. But after I've been dealing with a lot of anxiety and overwhelm and overwork from working 2 jobs, we decided that I too should also be doing some acupuncture, which I have done in the past. I had a previous back injury that really benefited from acupuncture. So I'm currently doing acupuncture and doing some traditional Chinese medicine herbs, which I know a little bit about TCM, but not a whole lot. So it's been pretty cool to see how that has kind of affected my cycle, and working with him has been really nice. And I specify working with him because even in the alternative realms of alternative health and modality, women's health isn't fully understood. So, like, cycle health isn't fully understood. So, for instance, he gave me those herbs, and I've noticed that it helped a lot more during my luteal phase, which from my understanding, the current formula that I'm on is to help with estrogen dominance, to minimize the effects of estrogen dominance, support the liver, which is what helps process all of the estrogen as well as like everything else that we come into contact with, lower stress and anxiety and all the things that I do need. But as I kind of took that information in, I realized it'd be better for that to be in the luteal phase. Because if it's helping the body process estrogen, I don't want it to be interfering with my body making estrogen in the first half of the cycle, because we do want to be making estrogen to be able to peak in around the ovulatory phase to be able to ovulate. So I didn't want it to interfere with that since my follicular phases are generally longer. So I told him that I found it more beneficial to take it in my luteal phase, which is honestly so nice to be able to be working with your healthcare team versus as kind of like a more hierarchical situation. So yeah, doing acupuncture, doing the Chinese medicine herbs. I'm also trying to reduce stress as much as possible, kind of keeping note of those batteries. So the battery reserves for my social battery as well as kind of like my work capacity battery, because I'll notice during ovulation, which I'm currently kind of like in the middle of ovulating or like getting ramping up to ovulating, I'll be able to work a lot more, a lot longer hours than I could if I'm in my luteal phase or early follicular phase. So now what I'm currently trying to do, which keyword is trying, is that I'm trying instead of stopping when I'm already at the empty tank, when I'm already low energy, I'm already fatigued, like I'm already like tapping out, I need to lay down. Instead of waiting until that moment, I'm trying to stop earlier than that. So when I'm starting to feel a little tired, a little bit more fatigued, I'm like, okay, I need to stop, switch gears, do something that is going to replenish me instead of drain me. And then lastly is really honing in on charting my cycle. I have been charting my cycle for many years, 4 or 5 years now. And sometimes I'm a little bit more lax because I'm like, okay, I understand my cycles. I'll take note of the important things. The important things being things like symptoms that I'm tracking, cervical fluid temps, but sometimes I'll get a little lazy and I'll skip cervical fluid one day. Or I'll know I need to sleep in, so I'll just like won't take my temperature a day, and then it turns into 2 days, and it turns into 3 days. So reining in, because that practice of charting my cycle is what has really given me so much insight into what I need to be working on for the next cycle. Being able to take note that that follicular phase is longer, that I didn't ovulate, that I do have more breast tenderness around the ovulation and luteal phases that I need to keep note of. So that practice of charting my cycle is kind of the foundation to making a game plan to how to improve for my next cycle. So if you yourself are interested in charting your cycle or looking to chart your cycle, I would highly recommend it because honestly, it's been game changing for me as someone that does suffer from hormonal imbalances a lot of the time. Now, if you're someone that is still pretty new to the concept of healing your cycle naturally or taking a more natural approach, I do have a starter kit that kind of goes over some things to look at or keep in mind, or just as a starting point so you can further do your research. I also have a class where you can learn how to chart your cycle when it comes to your hormonal health, as well as other videos that go into a little bit more depth on that. But yeah, overall, just taking things a little bit slower, which I know for me is a little hard because I like to be a workaholic, and that is probably why I get so many hormonal imbalances to start with. Just cortisol, a lot of adrenaline that can then lead to anxiety, which can then interfere with my sleep, and it just becomes a cascade of things that can mess with your hormones. But on the bright side is that I now recognize that I know it. So when things get a little bit too stressful, a little bit too anxious, I take further steps to mitigate that as much as I can so it doesn't impact me as much. So that's all I got for you today. Thank you so much for hanging out with me, and I'll be seeing you next time.